happy you are, Juliet. I even envy you. Your daughter is brilliant and beautiful, heading off to a prestigious university. And your husband, what a great guy. He landed a high-paying job, Valerie said. As for me, my son is lazy, and my husband is no better. Don't make things up. You have a wonderful family. Juliet smiled. Why should I be envious? Grace is leaving tomorrow morning, and I'll be all alone. By the way, can I leave a little earlier today? I want to prepare some dough and bake a pie for her journey. Go ahead, her coworker shrugged. I think I can manage without you. Juliet quickly grabbed her bag and rushed out onto the street. Her heart was heavy. Her daughter was leaving tomorrow, and she hadn't prepared her for the journey yet. She really didn't want to let Grace go alone to the big city. But what could she do? Education was important. Grace had graduated from school with top marks and had every chance of getting into the pedagogical university. After setting the dough aside, Juliet sat by the window and felt a wave of sadness wash over her. She hadn't heard from Tristan in a long time. It had been 6 months since her husband had gone on his business trip. Initially, he wrote every week, but then the letters became less and less frequent. Are you baking a pie? Grace smiled as she walked in and saw the dough. Yes, darling. Take it with you on your journey. I can't imagine you being all alone out there, Juliet said. Don't worry, Mom. I'm a grown-up now, independent, the young woman replied. Nothing will happen to me. Has Dad sent any letters? She asked, noticing her mother's downcast mood. No. Why isn't he writing? Maybe something happened. Don't worry, Mom. Dad is fine. What should he write about, anyway? Grace reassured her mother. Yeah, Juliet sighed heavily. Seeing her daughter off, the woman grew even sadder. She blamed herself for letting her husband go so far away. She would rather earn less but live at home, within her family. 6 months passed, and Christmas was approaching. Juliet was busy with household chores. Her daughter had promised to come home for the winter break. The woman was relieved that she wouldn't have to spend the holidays alone. Unexpectedly, a knock on the door made Juliet jump. A mail carrier stood on the doorstep, and Juliet smiled as she held a letter in her hand. Well, rejoice. Vivian laughed. You've got mail. Guess from whom? From Tristan. Juliet's eyes lit up with happiness. Who else? Vivian smiled, handing her the envelope. Oh, Juliet, I envy you. You're so lucky. Why is everyone envious? Juliet wondered. Do I have something that you don't? You have a good husband who loves you, Vivian said. He's gone to work to buy you a new home. But mine, he drinks from morning till night. Anyway, I'll be on my way. Juliet closed the door and sat by the window, eagerly opening the envelope. Strangely, the letter was very small and seemed more like a note. Forgive me, I won't come home. I've fallen in love with another woman and realized what it means to be truly happy. I'm sorry once again, Tristan. Dropping the letter to the floor, Juliet stood frozen in the middle of the room. For some reason, she thought it might be a joke. Tristan loved surprises. Maybe he sent Vivian with the letter and was waiting outside. The door would open any moment. He would come in, hug her, and start laughing. But looking at the postal stamp, Juliet realized that it was no joke. She sank to the floor, tears streaming down her face. What happened, Mom? Grace asked. Juliet didn't even hear the front door slam. Her daughter stood in the doorway with a large suitcase in her hand. Sweetheart, Juliet rushed to Grace. Everything's fine. My back just hurts. Grace glanced at the floor where a small sheet of paper lay next to an envelope, but she pretended not to notice. I'm so glad. Juliet smiled, wiping away her tears. Being alone is unbearable. Is Dad not coming back yet? Grace asked. Not yet, the woman replied, picking up the envelope with the letter. He hasn't finished his work. Now you won't be alone, Grace timidly said. What do you mean? Juliet didn't understand. Grace lowered her head. She didn't know how to tell her mother that she had dropped out of college and wouldn't be leaving home anymore. Grace, what's going on? Juliet exclaimed, noticing her daughter's rounded belly. Are you pregnant? Mom, please, don't ask me about anything, Grace cried, running to her room. Juliet sank onto the couch in helplessness. What was happening to her? Grace, you can't pretend that nothing happened, she whispered to herself. You'll have to explain. It's inevitable. Juliet decided to have a serious conversation with her daughter. There's nothing to talk about. The child doesn't have a father, and it's too late for an abortion, the girl said without looking up. I'm sorry, I'm just so tired. Juliet wanted to leave the room to give Grace some rest after a journey. She had no idea how to handle a situation like this, but after looking into her daughter's eyes, she turned back. I'm asking you not to shut yourself off, Juliet said, embracing her daughter. I'm sorry, Mom, the girl cried, clinging to her mother. Grace told her mother the classic story that many young, trusting girls encounter. She had met a good guy, fallen head over heels in love. He reciprocated and promised they would be together forever. But as soon as he found out about her pregnancy, he broke up with her. There's nothing we can do now. We'll raise the baby. You need to take care of your health, the woman said. How will Dad react to this? He won't forgive me for such shame, Grace cried. Don't worry, I didn't want to upset you for now, but it seems I have to. Here, read this. Juliet pulled a crumpled piece of paper from her pocket and handed it to her daughter. How could he? Dad loves you so much. I can't believe it, Grace protested. People consider you the perfect couple. Apparently, he didn't love me as much as he claimed if he found a replacement in just 6 months, the woman smirked. Let's not dwell on the sad stuff. Right now, we need to focus on the baby. We manage somehow. Let's go have lunch. Grace had a very tough time. People whispered behind her back, and some looked at her with undisguised contempt and judgment. It got to the point where she practically stopped going outside. Grace, you can't stay locked up all the time, Juliet protested. You need fresh air. Mom, I can't. Those looks, the laughter behind my back. Grace trailed off. Unfortunately, our society hasn't fully embraced the idea that giving birth to a child outside of marriage is not a crime, let alone a shame. The birth of a person is, first and foremost, a bright, happy moment in a woman's life. And if this child doesn't have a legal father, it doesn't mean they don't have the right to a full and happy life. Thank you, Mom. Thank you for your support. Grace smiled, wiping away her tears. Juliet herself was going through a tough time, but her daughter's emotional well-being was more important. At the moment, she needed to support Grace, setting aside her own personal problems. Juliet was at work when her anxious neighbor called. Jane informed her that Grace had gone into premature labor and had been taken to the hospital. I need to rush home. Grace is giving birth, Juliet shouted. But it's still too early for her to give birth, her colleague remarked. I know, Juliet cried. Go, God willing, everything will be fine. Valerie tried to comfort her. Looking at the clock, Juliet realized she wouldn't make it in time for the last bus. She dashed onto the road, trying to hitch a ride. When she arrived at the maternity ward, she ran inside to inquire about her daughter. She's already given birth, the nurse said cheerfully, checking the records. The delivery was very quick. Your daughter and grandson are both fine. The baby is premature. Is he really okay? Juliet asked anxiously. For more detailed information, you can speak to the doctor in the morning. Juliet arrived home late in the evening, her heart filled with joy. It was hard to believe that at the age of 38, she was already a grandmother. In the morning, she rushed to the maternity ward, eager to see Grace and her grandson. Maybe they would allow her to visit her daughter, even for a moment. Are you Grace's mother? The nurse gave Juliet an anxious look. Yes, what's wrong with Grace? The woman asked in fear. Wait here. The doctor will be down shortly. About 10 minutes later, a friendly but exhausted-looking doctor appeared. It seemed he hadn't rested for several days. What's happened to Grace? The woman cried with tears in her eyes. Are you her mother? Michael asked intently. Yes, the woman replied impatiently. Grace has run away. How? Where did she run to? Juliet was bewildered. Unfortunately, I don't know. I think you might have a better idea of where your daughter could be, the doctor said, shrugging. This is absurd. Calm down. Your daughter might be experiencing postpartum depression. She might come to her senses and return soon. At least, that's what we hope for. The man said. What about the baby? Can I see him? Juliet asked. The baby, though premature, is completely healthy. He'll be with us for about 10 days, and then we'll see. Come with me. Juliet approached the crib and looked at the tiny baby. The infant was peacefully asleep. Where's my grandson? She asked the doctor quietly. Here he is. You're looking at him. The man smiled. Him? Why is he so dark? What's wrong with him? Juliet didn't understand. He's biracial. A lovely baby. As I mentioned earlier, he's perfectly healthy. Oh my goodness. Juliet couldn't contain herself. Exiting into the corridor, Juliet sat down on a bench. Her thoughts swirled in her head all at once. She couldn't understand what was happening around her. Juliet, I have a question for you. If your daughter doesn't show up, do you plan to place the baby in foster care? Michael asked. No, I will take my grandson regardless, Juliet said wearily. When can I pick him up? She calmly inquired. The woman calmed down. She realized she needed to pull herself together and find a way out of the situation. Not so fast, the doctor replied, looking puzzled. First, let's wait a few days. Maybe your daughter will return. If not, we'll need permission from Child Protective Services. Why? He's my grandson. Grace will definitely come back. These are the rules. Michael shrugged. I didn't write them, but I can't break them either. It's a standard procedure. Juliet drove home, hoping that Grace was already there. She was deeply concerned about her daughter's mental and physical well-being. She couldn't understand why her daughter had acted this way but never lost hope that she would return. Seeing a lock on the door, Juliet sighed heavily. Sitting on the porch steps, she began to cry. Not long ago, everyone in the neighborhood considered her the happiest woman. They openly envied her family's well-being. And now, what had happened? Everything had been turned upside down. All night, the woman didn't sleep and listened to the silence of the night. She constantly imagined that someone was knocking on the door. She pictured Grace wandering somewhere, exhausted and weakened. Michael, has she returned? Juliet whispered hopefully, dialing the doctor's number. No. Are you preparing the paperwork? The doctor asked. I'll get to it today, the woman promised. How's the baby? Is he doing well? Juliet didn't know how she would manage alone with her grandson. She would have to quit her job. The savings she had set aside wouldn't last long. She thought about her husband, who had betrayed her, and started crying again. How could he leave his family and not even inquire about our well-being? We spent 20 years together, and in an instant, we became complete strangers. After settling all the matters with the Child Protective Services, Juliet went to collect her grandson. What will you name him? The doctor smiled upon seeing the woman. Michael, you're the first kind person in his life. I'll name him after you so that his life can be just as bright. Juliet said, Thank you. That's how it will be. Michael will grow up to be a good person, the doctor said seriously. At home, Juliet was greeted by her friend Valerie, who was taken aback when she saw the baby. Don't be alarmed. Biracial babies are just like us, Juliet said with a hint of reproach. Wow, I just didn't expect it. And the baby is wonderful, a real beauty. Before you know it, he'll be bringing his bride home. Everything will be fine. The initial period might be tough, but I'll help you, Valerie promised. Thank you. Right now, I'm more worried about Grace. Where is she, and with whom? Juliet inquired. I have no idea about that. Maybe she went to the baby's father, Valerie speculated. Valerie left late in the evening, leaving Juliet alone with her heavy thoughts. Michael, as if he sensed that he had caused a lot of trouble, remained remarkably calm. It was as if he was thanking his grandmother for not leaving him to fate's whims. 3 months later, Juliet received a letter from Tristan. Her husband was concise. Coming tomorrow, Tristan. She had no idea why he was coming. Perhaps he wanted a divorce or to discuss dividing their assets. She suddenly realized that she knew very little about the person she had spent her entire life with. She had no idea what other surprises to expect from him. Someone timidly knocked on the door. Juliet glanced at Michael, peacefully sleeping in his crib, and went to answer it. Hello, Tristan said, looking down. Hello, Juliet. Forgive me if you can. I know I acted like a jerk. I don't even understand what came over me. I've come to realize that besides you, I don't need anyone else. I've always loved only you. A quiet cry from Michael echoed through the house. Juliet hurried to her grandson. Taking the baby in her arms, she held him close. What's this? Tristan entered the room, bewildered. A child, Juliet calmly stated. Michael, where did he come from? Tristan demanded angrily. Don't you know where children come from? And don't shout. You'll scare the child. Juliet enjoyed teasing her husband, hoping he would understand what it felt like to be betrayed by a loved one. How could you? Tristan exclaimed, seething with anger. He shot a scornful look at Juliet and stormed out of the house, slamming the door loudly. That's right, Michael. Just a moment ago, your granddad was swearing eternal love and asking for forgiveness for his infidelity. But he couldn't forgive, Juliet said with a smirk. Juliet, are you home? Vivian, the local mail carrier, shouted from the doorstep. Don't shout. Michael just fell asleep. Sorry, I totally forgot. Well, you're a lucky one. You've got a letter. Oh, how happy you must be. Vivian rolled her eyes, smirking. Of course, I'm happy, Juliet replied proudly. I'm alive, healthy, and I've finally met my grandson. Why shouldn't I be happy? Vivian was displeased that Juliet didn't break down in tears or complain about her life. Placing the letter on the table, she quickly said her goodbyes. Juliet picked up the envelope with no return address. She immediately recognized her daughter's handwriting. With trembling hands, she opened the letter and burst into tears. Mom, forgive me. I couldn't do it any other way. I had to think everything through carefully before taking the step. I know you have the baby. You took him hoping that I'd come to my senses and eventually take him back. But that will never happen. I don't want to ruin my life. Put the baby in an orphanage. Don't make your already difficult life even harder. I won't be coming home for now. I need time to forget everything. You see, my dear, she didn't even call you her son once. Don't worry, baby. I'll never give you away to anyone, Juliet whispered. Taking the baby, Juliet decided to take a walk in the park. As she pushed the stroller through the gate, she stopped in her tracks. Tristan stood before her. She wanted to rush into his arms out of habit. He seemed so close, so familiar, and yet so distant and foreign. Tristan silently gazed at her, seemingly unable to find the right words. Hello, I assume you're here to talk about a divorce. Well, I'm glad you came. I was planning to look for you, Juliet said. Juliet, let's not rush things. Maybe we can start over. I can't be without you. I've tried to hate you, to forget you, but I can't. Remember how happy we used to be? Tristan pleaded. Unfortunately, things can never go back to the way they were. I'm not alone anymore. Now I have a son. I don't think you can forget everything and accept Michael as your own, Juliet replied. Juliet decided to play it out until the end. Tristan was convinced that Michael was Juliet's son. She was curious whether he loved her enough to accept another person's child. I can, Tristan confidently declared. After all, he's just a child, and it's not his fault. Besides, your son can't be a stranger to me. Juliet finally forgave him. Smiling, she embraced her husband. They strolled through the paths of the spring park for a long time. Tristan pushed the stroller with the baby, radiating pride. Juliet smiled as she watched her husband. She once again realized that he truly loved her. Not every man would be able to accept another person's child. People say she's the happiest, and it seems they're right. Juliet, I can't help but feel that Michael really looks like me. Look, we have identical facial features. The only difference is that he's darker, and I'm fair, Tristan remarked. I think you're right. Michael does look like his granddad, Juliet chuckled. His granddad. Tristan didn't understand. Like you, when you first came, saw the baby, and accused me of all kinds of things, you hurt me deeply. I wanted to tell you right away that Michael is our grandson, but I decided not to when you hurt me like that. You came to beg for forgiveness for your infidelity, but you couldn't forgive yourself, Juliet explained. Juliet, what are you talking about? What grandson? Tristan was losing patience. Michael is Grace's son. She abandoned him at the maternity ward. She ran away. She didn't want to ruin her life, Juliet replied. That's what it was. I couldn't understand why I had such strange feelings for someone else's child. Why didn't you tell me right away? What if I hadn't come? Then we wouldn't have meant anything to you, Juliet laughed. But you did come, and that's what matters. Tristan embraced his wife. He wasn't angry with Juliet for teaching him this lesson. He had earned it fair and square. Why did our daughter do this? Did we miss something in her upbringing? Tristan asked. I don't know, maybe. Grace sent a letter asking us to put the boy in an orphanage. She said she's not ready to see us yet, Juliet explained. Well, it seems we lost our daughter and gained a son, Tristan philosophically remarked. That seems to be the case, Juliet sighed. But the most important thing is that we're together. Now I have nothing to fear. How quickly time flies, Juliet said sadly. It feels like we just sent Michael off to school, and now it's time for him to go to the army. You're right, and Michael is a great kid. What a handsome young man has become. Tristan smiled. I'm worried about him. How will he fare on his own in the army? Juliet, don't worry me. Everything will be fine. Don't fret. Michael won't let anyone harm him. Tristan hurried to reassure his wife. Michael grew up to be a fine young man. Juliet and Tristan had put in all their efforts to raise their grandson as an honest and upright person. The young man still didn't know that he was Juliet and Tristan's grandson, not their son. Such was the will of his mother, Grace. She had only visited home once when Michael was just 2 years old. Upon seeing that his mother hadn't given him up to an orphanage, she became very angry. I ask you to do it. This child is a disgrace to our family. I hoped he would be born looking like me. Grace protested. You're the one who brought disgrace to our family. Tristan retorted angrily. Michael will be our son. You can leave. Grace left, and since then, the parents heard nothing from her. Michael grew into a handsome young man. He had a tan but resembled Tristan. Many girls were already attracted to him, but Michael wasn't in a hurry to get married. He intended to attend medical school to become a surgeon after returning from the army, and then he would think about starting a family. Why so glum? Michael entered the house. The weather is great. Dad, how about going fishing? Sure, we can do that, Tristan agreed. Son, you'll have to go to the army, Juliet said with a detached voice. Great, Michael smiled. Juliet couldn't hold back her tears, covered her face with her hands, and cried. Mom, what's wrong? Stop. Michael hugged her and sat down beside her. Don't pay attention, son. You know our mother. Tristan smiled. A few days later, Michael went for his medical examination. Upon hearing his last name, he entered the spacious doctor's office. Hello, I'm perfectly healthy. He smiled at the pleasant lady. Great. The doctor smiled back. The woman looked closely at the young man and turned pale. Grace immediately realized that the person before her was her son. It was evident not just from the last name, but also from his appearance. Michael bore a striking resemblance to his grandfather, Grace's father. Michael quickly completed his checkup and headed home. In the evening, the whole family gathered for dinner. Juliet had baked a pie that Michael loved. Unexpectedly, there was a knock at the door. Michael jumped up from his chair and rushed to open it. Grace. The young man was surprised when he saw the doctor. Are you here for me? And for you too, Grace quietly replied. Seeing her daughter, Juliet froze in place. Mom, this is the therapist, Grace, Michael explained, looking bewildered. All right, son, go visit your friend. We need to talk, Juliet said, realizing that something strange was happening. Michael didn't argue with his mother. He'd had dressed and left to visit his friend, deciding not to interfere with the adults. Hello, Grace said with a trembling voice when they were alone. Hello, Grace. Why did you come? What did you tell Michael? Juliet asked. We've been out of touch for 18 years. What's changed? Today, Michael came to see me for a checkup. I just want to help. If you want, I can arrange for him not to go to the army, Grace replied, lowering her head. Tristan emerged from the room. He had overheard the conversation between his wife and daughter and couldn't help but intervene. He had long forgiven his daughter. Grace had made her choice. Grace, there's no need to meddle in our affairs. We will handle it ourselves, Tristan stated. Come in, Juliet said, pointing to the door. The conversation was long and heavy. Grace shared her life story. She had been living in the city all this time. She graduated from college, got married to a colleague, but after 5 years of marriage, her husband realized she couldn't have children. He believed that a family couldn't be complete without children, so he left her, leaving her in complete solitude. Since then, I've been living alone. I have an apartment, a good job, but my life has no meaning, Grace admitted. Do you want us to pity you? Tristan was surprised. I understand that people can make mistakes, but over time, they try to correct them. Grace, where were you all these years? You're right, Grace cried. I have no rights to our son. I'll go. Forgive me if you can. Grace left the house, bundled up in a warm scarf, and hurried to the bus stop. Grace, she heard a familiar voice behind her. Michael, Grace turned around to see the young man. I understand that you're my mother, Michael asked directly, looking into the tear-filled eyes of the woman. How do you know? Grace whispered. I've known for a while that I am my parents' grandson. It sounds funny, doesn't it? Michael sadly smiled. I didn't actually go to my friend's place. I stood by the window and listened to your conversation. I'm sorry, the woman whispered. I don't know what to say in situations like this. I just wanted to see you, but overall, I have wonderful parents. I love them very much. Goodbye, Grace. Michael wanted to smile at his mother, but instead, his face contorted into a strange grimace. I think we were too harsh on her. She is our own daughter after all, Juliet said. Perhaps, Tristan agreed. But what were we supposed to do? She abandoned not only her son but us as well, even though we did nothing wrong. And how do we explain to Michael now that we are not his biological parents? I believe life will sort everything out in its own way. Michael returned home in a somber mood. He felt heavy-hearted. He understood that this woman was not deserving of respect, but he regretted having hurt her. Regardless, she had given him life. Michael, did you invite friends for the farewell evening? Juliet inquired. How many people are coming? About 10 people will be there, he replied. I would like to invite one more person. Are you okay with that? Invite anyone you want. I want to invite Grace. The silence filled the room. Juliet looked at Michael, feeling lost and unsure of what to say. Mom, Dad, please don't be upset. I know everything about my mother, Michael confessed. If you're against it, I won't have any contact with her. I just felt like she's very unhappy and lonely. Do as you see fit, son, Tristan said. I'm glad we raised you to be a decent person. In the garden, around the table, gathered the closest and dearest people to Michael. Grace tightly held her son's hand. She never even dreamed of returning to her family home. Juliet and Tristan were glad that Grace had come to her senses after all these years. After all, only close family can forget all grievances and genuinely forgive a loved one.